on there. Maka, where you going? You see, you have to stay isolated.
Hey, approach with caution. Approach with caution. How you deal with?
Caution. Me and my spirit, you know. Caution, where you deal with it now.
How you deal with? I'm telling you, man. You see me, I'm ready for the road now.
Yeah.
Hey.
Bang.
For more civilized age.
Listen me, you don't know this a BC, you know. I represent for the maddest channel. You get all of the latest dancehall, the latest reggae, the whole of the bad music them. Then a must fame Edjahz, don't get it twisted, BC and dance to the fullest. Subscribe to it, like it. You see me, I say, move with it. It's a part of the movement. Yes, I, BC, I say, represent. Listen me.
Since Anana, glory and power. You don't know, if you just there up on a brand new show, a fresh new show. Big up all of my subscribers and all of my viewers them. And all who not subscribe it, the door is always open. So who now wait for, who don't know what you go do. People, just as owner sitting at the title and a joke thing, and this is going right now. The whole 7 mile, 8 mile BullBay area is in complete lockdown. In other words, it's been quarantined. Remember, I did tell you in my previous show, so the government do a good job of keeping us informed. Well, moments ago, the Prime Minister went live and break the news to us. The whole 7 mile, 8 mile BullBay under complete lockdown. People, we now waste no time. We are bringing the update right now.
The Minister with responsibility for disaster preparedness and emergency management, that is Minister Desmond McKenzie, he has written to inform me that Jamaica is threatened and affected by the SARS-CoV-2, that is the coronavirus COVID-19, and that measures apart from or in addition to those specially provided for in the Disaster Risk Management Act should be taken promptly. Now therefore, in the exercise of the powers conferred upon me as Prime Minister by Section 26(2) of the Disaster Risk Management Act, the following order is hereby made. 1. This order may be cited as a Disaster Risk Management Declaration of Disaster Area Order 2020. And 2, the whole of Jamaica is hereby declared to be a disaster area. Signed today, 13th day of March 2020. What does that mean? It is, given our legal framework, this now gives the government authority to take certain measures. One measure we are about to take, or would have already taken, is the quarantine of a community, which is the 7 and 8 miles area of BullBay. And I would now invite Minister Tufton to just give details on that.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Good evening to my colleagues and all who are here. We have been in public health with the support of the Honourable Prime Minister and the Cabinet, monitoring the situation as it relates to the importation of the virus, so persons who have picked it up outside of Jamaica bringing it in, and attempts to contain so that it does not translate to community spread. And a number of things have been done to date. First of all, as you know, we had announced 2 positive tests related to 2 individuals who had a travel history involving the UK. And those individuals, having determined that they had symptoms and assessed their travel history, we proceeded to interrogate them and to attempt to do a tracing of who they came in contact with within their particular community or wherever they went, and made a risk assessment of those individuals. In some instances, those individuals were encouraged or placed under house quarantine, so they were held in their homes. and an appropriate monitoring mechanism put in place, temperature checks and so on. In other instances, they were brought into our government-managed quarantine facilities and monitored over time. Yesterday, we announced an additional 6 persons with positive testing, and at the Prime Minister's indication, I will give details on that. But of that 6, 2 of those persons were linked to the first person who was tested positive. We classify that person as patient 0. This is the person who resided for the time in 7 to 8 Mile BullBay in that community. We had a number of persons in government quarantine facilities related to that individual, as well as investigations in the community identified a number of others that the person came in contact with. Up to today, based on the activities in the field, the medical team and the chief medical officer who is here led that process, determined that based on all the information that we have, persons experiencing symptoms, there has been some amount of community exposure sufficient to raise the risk level to a community transmission potential. In other words, there are a number of persons who are showing signs, symptoms that suggested that they were ill or are becoming ill, and that it could be related to that original individual. And the CMO is here. At some point I'll ask her to comment more definitively on that. But what that translated to, therefore, is that we needed to contain the spread within that vicinity, and hence the decision that we needed to quarantine that 7 to 8 Mile BullBay community, because we felt it was substantial enough. What that means, you're going to explain that, Prime Minister, you want me to? What that means basically is that we would call on the other agencies of government as part of the National Disaster Response Committee that the Prime Minister chairs, the Secretariat being, of course, in ODPEM, in the Ministry of Local Government. So the Constabulary, the JDF, the Ministry of Labour, of course, Ministry of Health, and other agencies to work with the community in a way that would minimize movement outside of the community, give all the necessary support to the community members, but effectively that community would be under a quarantine situation. And in the meantime, over that 14-day period, we would assess to determine the extent of the spread of the virus and apply the appropriate levels of treatment to those individuals. So that is essentially, in simple form, what the decision that has been taken as it relates to that community.
So what it also means is that the JCF and the JDF has been deployed. There will be restrictions on movement in and out of the community. The Ministry of Health has made provisions to provide food packages, water supply where necessary, obviously medicine. This is not, we're not treating this like a curfew. I don't want the citizens there to feel that the state is imposing a security cordon on them. This is for their own benefit as well as for the rest of Jamaica's benefit. The soldiers and policemen and women are appropriately geared, and I would ask CS and the Commissioner if they would like to just give a brief description of what the operations would look like. CS?
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. The troops have been deployed, JDF and JCF, to the community, and you will see us pretty much in the way you've seen us in the states of emergencies and zones of special operation, managing intersections and access points to the communities. The difference is going to be, whereas when we're doing a security operation, we would do check searches and allow people to proceed. In this case, we'll be seeking to restrict movement in and outside the community. Obviously, there are going to be situations where persons have legitimate reasons to be moving in and out, and in such cases, appropriate records will be kept, guided by the Ministry of Health as to what profile of persons may be allowed to enter and exit, and what documentation that will need to take place. But generally speaking, there will be more restrictions on people being allowed to enter and exit. As was indicated, provisions will be made by the Ministry of Health, and to make sure that the community is well served. What we ask, as usual, is that there be cooperation with the members of the security forces, as the Prime Minister has indicated. In this particular case, we're trying to protect the community and trying to ensure that we don't end up with unnecessary spread of the virus to the extent that it is here. So we ask for your cooperation with the security forces.
So over the past few days and probably the past week, we've been taking some of our members through specific training to do this type of operation. So those people have been deployed now for this purpose. And it's really, as I say, to protect the wider community of Jamaica and protect those people inside and just slow or reduce the chances of transmission into and out of the community. Obviously, our own members will be taking precautions to protect themselves as well. And so it's really important that people cooperate with our verbal instructions so that we can have everything running smoothly. As I say, it's all for everyone's, in everyone's best interest and for everyone's protection.
I'm going to invite the CMO to join in. Thank you, gentlemen. CMO, because I think the public would be curious to know what would be the operations inside the zone from a health perspective, and how many persons are actually suspected within the zone. So I'm going to ask our CMO to give that detail.
Good evening, everyone. In doing our contact tracing, we have detected over 30 persons within the community that have had contact, direct and pretty close contact with our index case. And of those 30 persons, we have about 8 persons that are symptomatic right now. We consider that to be enough reason to be concerned. We realize that persons tend to move around. We realize that a lot more households than the households that we have interviewed were affected. And so therefore the community itself is concerned. It is therefore important for us to try to restrict the movement of persons to prevent further spread of the infection. The restrictions are really to protect the persons within the community and to protect persons outside of the community and to protect the country as a whole. Our aim during the next 14 days when the community is under these restrictions is to educate. Is to educate all the persons that are affected as to what it is that is happening to them, what it is that they are to expect from this illness, how it is that they can prevent this illness from getting worse, how it is that they can prevent their loved ones from becoming affected. So while the restrictions are not anything that anybody likes, but if you can prevent your loved one from becoming ill, and your loved one may be somebody who has a chronic illness, or maybe of at the age where, despite the fact that you may get a mild illness, that person can get a severe illness, I am sure everybody would want to prevent that from happening. And so, therefore, we think that this is the best way to go. We really want to support the community, and as I said, health education, providing the necessary medical support as needed. So we will be in constant communication. We will be there on the ground as well, in constant communication with the security forces, with the JDF and the JCF, to identify persons who may be ill, to reach them early, and to be able to offer them assistance. So it is going to be a very intensive 2-week period, but we are hoping that within that 2-week period, we are going to limit any further spread of the infection.
Thank you very much, Simo. Now, just to place in context what we're doing, we've used the disaster risk management legislation, which is the overarching legislation which guides the government's response. The first use of the legislation was when we convened the Disaster Risk Management Council. Many, and I see some members here with us this evening, and they have been meeting, and I gather you met with them today, Minister Mackenzie, and they have been collaborating with the Ministry of Health. So I want the country to appreciate that the entire government and civil society and NGOs are mobilized, and that mobilization will become even more intense as we progress into this crisis that we now face. There are various subcommittees of the National Council all working on different areas. My job as Prime Minister is to make sure that everything works together. And the Cabinet is in support of that, giving the general policy guidelines and promulgating the various initiatives as we are doing now. Now, the legislation also gives us certain powers to act. And the Attorney General is here with me, and I've asked her to go through all the powers that we have under the law to address this particular kind of health crisis, which would include powers that would place an obligation on citizens to report. And citizens reporting is an absolutely important part of us being successful in overcoming these infectious challenges. The truth is that if persons hide their conditions when asked, give misleading information when asked, then that can cause its own stream of negative consequences for which we would have no knowledge and would not be able to respond. So some of the laws do place an obligation and indeed creates an offense for misleading the public health officials. So I'm going to ask the AG to just very quickly give the public an overview of all the legislation that is there and the various powers that comes with it.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good evening, everyone. In respect of the laws that we have, starting with the Constitution, of course you'll be aware of Section 69, which gives the Cabinet as the principal instrument of policy and with responsibility for the overall direction of government and overarching power to determine comprehensive policy. We also have Section 20, which empowers the Governor General to issue a proclamation declaring a state of public disaster. But we have not gone that route. Instead, the Prime Minister has utilized the powers under the 2015 Disaster Risk Management Act to declare the whole of Jamaica as a disaster area consequent on the notification he got from the Minister of Local Government and Community Development. Then we have the Emergency Powers Act, we have the Public Health Act, giving responsibility to the Minister with responsibility for health and also to the local board. And essentially those are broad investigative powers in relation to disease and the prevention of disease in parishes, and to do, more importantly, whatever is necessary to arrest the spread of disease. The Minister of Health also has responsibility after receiving a report from the Central Health Committee or the local board in respect of any threat to issue directions, and the Minister has already activated those powers to enforce measures to prevent and mitigate the spread of this communicable disease. The Public Health Act, again, authorizes the medical officer health or persons authorized in writing by the Minister of Health or the local board the right of entry upon any private premises to take action considered necessary in the interest of public health. So it means, which means that if there is suspicion that something is happening in your private places, the Minister may authorize entry there to investigate. It requires no warrant. It doesn't need your permission, because the step is being taken to prevent the spread of the disease. Minister of Health also is making additional regulations in relation to the treatment and prevention of this communicable disease, the isolation of patients, disinfecting and closing and destroying, if need be, of buildings which are in which infected persons have lodged. So if it's a stall, if it's anything, if the powers and the assessment require destruction, the Minister is authorized under law to do so. I want to, with the Prime Minister having declared Jamaica as a disaster area, I just want to remind persons of specific duties. So under the public health food handling regulations, and in particular regulations 27, 29 to 32, operators and employees of food establishment, handling establishment are under duty to be free from this COVID if you're working in the food establishment. So you must take every step to prevent yourself from coming into contact with persons who are suspected of having the disease. Medical officer is also under duty to notify if an operator suspects an employee or other person who enters a food handling establishment, if that person is suspected of suffering from the COVID. The operator and employee can also be required to be medically examined. And if you are so required, I have to tell you, you really have to comply. The Minister will advise of his amendment to the Class 1 notifiable disease order shortly to specifically include the COVID-19. The tourist establishment regulations.
Can you explain what the implication of that?
So essentially, the Public Health Act, the Quarantine Act, the Public Health Act, specifies a number of diseases, and in the last time the notification was done, I think, was when we had the threat of Ebola. So now the Minister has moved to formally utilize the powers under the law. So this is not just informal operation, and it activates all of the provisions of the law and all of the powers, and the powers are very large. Essentially, the Minister can do whatever is required to contain the disease.
So including reporting. So this is a disease for which you must report.
Prime Minister, it also includes giving answers to questions that may be asked of persons. And I want to remind that we do have an offense at common law of creating public mischief. We know a lot of information is being circulated, and some persons are delighting themselves in just being idle and passing around false information. You do so at your peril, because every constable is now authorized to enforce all of the laws in relation to the Quarantine Act. Specifically, Section 12 of the Quarantine Act places a duty on every constable to enforce compliance with any order, instruction, or condition that is made or imposed under the Act, using force if necessary. And they can enter your private premises to so enforce. So there is really no room to hide, and we're asking everyone to cooperate, because the government must act and must take every step necessary to safeguard you. To go back to duties that are imposed under the Public Health Tourism Establishment Regulations, Regulation 30, there is a duty to report to the medical officer where there is suspicion or confirmation of the COVID or any other communicable disease. And owners and operators must report. I know Minister Bartlett is already aware and is taking steps to circulate it to players in the industry. Then we have our hairdressers and our beauty therapists and our cosmetologists and beauty salons. We do have a regulation which specifically speaks to those operations. Regulations 11, 13, and 14 in particular imposes duties on the beauty therapist, the cosmetologist, the hairdresser, and the local board to ensure that you are not contaminated and that you are not contaminating anyone. So you are under duty to be free from this disease when working in your capacity as a beauty therapist, as a cosmetologist, and as a hairdresser. And please note that the local board can revoke your license if you're found to be suffering from this disease. And then the barbers and barber shops are also specifically regulated under the Public Health Barbers and Barbershop Regulations. And Regulations 11, 13, and 14 imposes a duty on the barber also to be free from the disease, meaning that you must not put yourself in harm's way. Get out of the way and ensure that you are not inviting persons or entertaining persons who are at risk. And your license too can be revoked. And Prime Minister has already indicated that the laws will be strictly enforced in this period.
Thank you, AG. We went through that brief overview, and we will produce documents and videos and memes for social media so that everyone is aware of the state in which we are now operating. Just to reinforce the point, the government has a very high duty and obligation to enforce the law, and we will enforce the law. Overnight, we declared, as we said we would, the results of the tests that were conducted. I'm going to ask Minister Tufton to just give you an overview of that.
Thank you, Reverend Prime Minister. And just listening to the AG and the awesome powers that she has bestowed on me, according to law, I'm almost intimidated. But I want to say that I will take no decision without the counsel of the Cabinet and the Honourable Prime Minister and all the necessary advisors in the ministry and otherwise, and it will always be in the best interest of the country, just for the record. So we announced as soon as we got confirmatory tests, and I want to emphasize, because again I saw a number of social media postings prior to our posting the results, suggesting that we had more positives. And part of the difficulty with that is that the tests are administered, which gives you a preliminary result and a confirmatory result. And for whatever reason, there are persons who had access to the preliminary results, and the impression was given that somehow we were withholding. But we don't do that. We have made a commitment to be as transparent as possible as it relates to this issue. I had to wait until I got the confirmatory results, and that was not available until much later in the night. And as soon as we got it, I had consultation with the Prime Minister, and he with the cabinet members, and the decision was taken to release within a few hours of getting it, just to clarify. So the results are as follows. 2 males aged 63 and 67 who came into the island on March 7th from Trinidad, having traveled from Malaysia by way of Dubai and London, and they presented at hospital on March 11th. 1 male, 36, who traveled from Manchester, England. He was taken to hospital from his hotel by an ambulance on March 11th. 1 male, 31, a Jamaican overseas ship worker who came in from the Canary Islands via Portugal and Miami. He arrived in the island on February 25th and presented to hospital with symptoms on March 10th. And 1 male, 52, who is the father of the first patient who was confirmed with COVID-19. He was discovered ill at home on March 11th. And 1 female, 34, who is a close contact also of the first patient who was confirmed similarly so, based on the contact with that first patient. I should note, and this is a point worth making, that we have patients in isolation in Mandeville, St. Anne's Bay, Cornwall Regional, Chess Hospital, and the University Hospital of the West Indies. And I make the point, not just to be transparent, but to say that the public health system does have the capacity to provide the isolation services that are required, the personnel to provide the appropriate levels of services in these institutions. Now, I know these numbers are small and they're expected to rise, but it's an indication of a trial run, if you will, in preparation for what may have to be the case later on. And then, of course, in terms of quarantine, the team have been out in the field in the respective areas, interviewing, collecting information, getting information from those patients, and by extension, therefore, developing the contact profile for others to determine how to proceed in terms of moving forward.
Thank you, Minister. Now, so that we understand overall strategy, the first strategy of the government was to prevent, delay the virus from getting into Jamaica. And we acted very early, putting in place travel restrictions and managing our ports, specifically as it related to cruise ship docking in Jamaica. And I believe we've been very successful. In fact, we would have been 120th or something like that out of the countries in the world for it to come to our shore. But we always knew that it would come. Our strategy was to delay it as long as possible. So now we are into the phase that we can conduct effectively contact tracing. So we want to use that as far as possible, to contain. And what we're doing now are taking all the measures within the next 14 days. We're in that 14-day period of containment. We're going to try as hard as possible to contain it. And the two strategies of prevention and containment, they have to work together for some time. And therefore, we wish to today announce that we will impose a travel restriction on the United Kingdom. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is here if you would want to join us. There might be things you want to explain. I'd ask the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health if you would want to join us as well to explain what that means, the travel restrictions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. My apologies. So the travel restrictions are in similar light to the travel restrictions that we have put in place for the 8 other countries that are on our restriction list. First, only citizens and persons who have residency or long stay arrangements or marriage exemptions will be landed in country. All other persons will not be landed at this time. Additionally, persons who are landed will now be required to be quarantined. And based on the Ministry of Health's risk assessment, the quarantine will be either in facility if you display symptoms, or you will be home quarantined. The restriction also applies where persons will be required to self-identify once they have come from this country, given that they are already in Ireland. And so if you are a citizen in Ireland who have come from the United Kingdom and you believe that you are beginning to display symptoms, we ask that you self-identify by contacting our 1-888 or 888 number. It's 888-1-LOVE. And once you contact us, we will begin to give you the necessary instructions. Our email is also up and running. It is covid19@moh.gov.jm, and we ask that citizens who believe that they are affected or because of their travel history, that they take the necessary actions to inform the health officials within these medium that we have advised.
Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, just to say that in relation to travel restrictions, there are powers under the Immigration Restrictions Commonwealth Citizens Act, and also under the Immigration Restriction Commonwealth Citizens Act and Immigration Restrictions Commonwealth Citizens Regulations under the Alien Act as well. And essentially, the health officer or an immigration officer may declare a person a prohibited immigrant because of that person's condition in relation to a communicable disease. The immigration officer, health officer, as well as the minister with responsibility for immigration, who is the Minister of National Security, in respect of a prohibited immigrant who has the disease, may exercise discretion to allow them or to deny them stay on the island, and also to subject them to quarantine and isolation. The Minister of National Security will also be exercising his powers in relation to the promulgation of regulations for the ports of entries and the times and places and conduct of inquiry or examinations, medical or otherwise, in respect of persons entering or persons desiring to enter the island. And if need be, we will also activate the powers to have removed from Jamaica anyone who is declared a prohibited immigrant as a result of the disease. And generally, the immigration officers are instructed and reminded of their powers to refuse to land anyone where the health officer certifies that they are undesirable in relation to the disease.
Thank you, Edjahz.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The Permanent Secretary did his usual creditable job in clarifying or laying out the criteria for the travel restrictions. Essentially, they followed the exact same lines as the restrictions in respect of the other countries for which Jamaica has imposed these restrictions. Just to clarify that when these announcements are being made, there are likely to be planes in the air from the United Kingdom. So these planes will be landed, but it is anticipated that flights that would be scheduled for tomorrow and going forward, that those will take or rather the restrictions will be applied there too. It would not be appropriate, reasonable, or perhaps impossible without legal consequence were we to apply them prior to the airlines being notified. And accordingly, those processes are already underway, having been triggered by the ministry responsible for tourism and the other relevant agencies and departments.
Thank you very much, Minister Johnson-Smith. One of the things I want the public to see, to understand, to appreciate, is that though there is a crisis, there is no breakdown in law and order or the functioning of the state. In fact, what we're doing is using law to create order by ensuring that the state functions. And which is why we have gone through with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that we are well aware of the legal framework in which we are operating. Why? Because there will be life after COVID. And people may want to utilize the judicial system, whether it is overseas or local. And therefore we are making sure that whatever we do is well within the bounds of the law. And that is an important signal to send to the country that it doesn't mean that this is the end of days. This is a state must be able to use its laws and its bureaucracy to respond to challenges. And that is what this government is ensuring will happen. I'm going to call on Minister Mackenzie shortly, but before I do, Minister Tufton has some other things that he needs to bring to your attention.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. So just to give 3 more minutes of what are some of the other things that public health is doing. We have begun the process of expanding our isolation areas in hospitals across the country. So today I was in Montego Bay, met with the 4 parishes of Western Jamaica, and the plans are in place. Areas of the hospital have been identified, and those areas are going to be cleared out and essentially become the isolation ward for that parish. Now, we all know that we don't have hospital beds just laying idly down for COVID or any other such special occurrence. So it's going to need some prioritization. So part of providing that isolation area is also to provide an alternative. To give you an example, just to give you sort of a practical sense of what we're doing. We are converting in one case what was the accident and emergency facility into an isolation ward. So we'll equip it with all the necessary furniture, and with the allocation of resource from the Ministry of Finance, we have already on order ICU beds, ventilators and so on. Some we have a few, but we have to get more. So that is now taking place, and we expect that in the coming week we would have had a number of those wards up and running, and the alternative arrangements made for persons who would need to vacate those facilities. The other thing that we're doing quickly is expanding the personnel to deal with what we anticipate will come. So we have been in dialogue with the Cuban ambassador, and by extension the Cuban government, to get an additional cadre of nurses, and we so far specialist nurses. So on the 24th of March, we will see our first 21 nurses arriving on the island from Cuba. These are nurses that we have a strong relationship with Cuba as a place nurse. We have over 300 health professionals that are Cuban working in our public health system. So that tradition is strong. We made a special appeal given the challenges, and we're trying to get about 100 additional specialist nurses in the system, focusing primarily on high-intensity units or ICU units. So the first 21 will come. We're also in dialogue with retired nurses. I want to use the opportunity to encourage our professionals who have reached retirement age but still very skilled and experienced. We're inviting them back to work with us during this period. And this is an official invitation. So that is also being worked on. In terms of equipment, the masks and the other critical equipment, we have in inventory. I've done some checks myself and I've seen some, but I really want to say one thing. We have lost a lot of our equipment through pilferage, persons stealing the equipment from the public health system. On the gears, the protective gears, the masks in particular. Now, on the face of it, it raises two issues. It says that we have to tighten up our internal management structures. I'll take the burden for that, and we're going to work to try and do that. But worse, I think, it really speaks to an unfortunate breakdown in just our social conscience, not to mention the deviant behavior, which is obviously legal. It really is a sad commentary that given these times when we need this equipment, persons are actually stealing and selling in the marketplace. Indeed, my information is that the police have so far identified one location where a box, several boxes, nearly 40 boxes of masks were found, taken from one hospital in Kingston, the Kingston Public Hospital. And I know the police will exercise their right and authority to pursue those individuals. But it's an indication of the challenges that we face. So I want to encourage Jamaicans, please refrain from doing this, and those who see it happening, give us the information and don't participate in that, because you're really contributing to the challenges that we face. Final thing I'll say for now, I'm told that I have to read the notice, so I'll officially read it. The Public Health Act, the Public Health Class 1 Notification Disease Amendment Order 2020, in exercise of the powers conferred upon the Minister by Section 2 of the Public Health Act. The following order is hereby made. This order may be cited as the Public Health Class 1 Notification Disease Amendment Order 2020 and shall be read and construed as one with the Public Health Class 1 Notification Diseases Order 2009, hereinafter referred to as the Principal Order, and all amendments thereto. Principal Order is amended in the schedule by inserting next after item 5 the following item: 5A SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19, dated this 13th day of March 2020, with my signature. Thank you.
So with that, we would have largely completed the public health section of this presentation. Chris and Edjahz, thank you. We now move over to some other issues, still slightly public health, but Minister Mackenzie. Now this particular disease has shown to be devastating on our senior population. On senior population, and we don't want it to affect our seniors here. So the Minister of Local Government has taken some steps to ensure that our infirmaries, our old age homes, and other state institutions which care for senior citizens, that there are measures in place to address this.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Ministry of Local Government has direct responsibility for our infirmaries and old age home. There are 13 infirmaries across the country, plus 3 old age homes, with a capacity of over some 3,500 senior citizens residing under the care of the state. 98% of those within our infirmaries fall within the risk category that is considered the most threatened of the individuals that could be affected by the disease. Therefore, the ministry has taken the following decisions with immediate effect to restrict access to our infirmaries for the next 14 days. Now, we are doing this because a number of persons normally visit our infirmaries, not just Jamaicans, but foreigners. So we are restricting visit to our infirmary for the next 14 days. And the next 30 days, we are also restricting new residents to our infirmary. So it means that persons who have already been interviewed and identified to be accepted to our infirmaries, we will be putting a hold on that for the next 30 days. Also, we are establishing isolation areas within the infirmaries. At least 4 infirmaries presently have that facility. Those infirmaries that are without isolation areas, construction will commence immediately, working closely with the Ministry of Health in putting in the necessary infrastructure to facilitate an isolation area in our infirmaries. We are also working with the ARTPEM and the Jamaica Defense Force to commence a comprehensive sanitation of our infirmaries. And we are also moving further to create a temporary employment program in our infirmaries and golden age home to have cleaning on a regular basis of our infirmaries. We are also moving to provide adequate medical and nutritional support to the infirmaries. We have also moved to put in place the necessary emergency management service. The Jamaica Fire Brigade is equipped in 5 parishes to provide ambulance services. And those areas without ambulance services, we have already contacted and made arrangements with private operators to provide those requisite service if and when those services will be required. We are moving to renovate a cluster, the Vineyard Town Golden Age Home, and a section of the Jamaican Infirmary to house social cases from our hospitals. In discussion with the Ministry of Health, there are over 132 such cases that are occupying bed spaces in our hospitals, and the infirmary is moving to create facility to ensure that we accommodate those we can. We are making provisions to house 50 such cases out of our public hospitals. I want to make a special appeal to persons. Cooperate with us, because we are speaking about a population that is vulnerable, and God help us if we should fall prey to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Mackenzie. Now, the last time I spoke to you, the question was asked about water and utilities, and I committed that we would have a meeting with the utilities. Minister Philip Williams is here, and Minister Vaz is here to give me some assistance with water. But we'll start with Minister Williams to just give us a brief update on the state of our electricity and our telecommunications services, how ready they are to withstand any challenges.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, everyone, or good night, everyone. So I met today with the telcos and had a teleconference with GPS. In terms of the telcos, they went through with me their emergency and business continuity plans, which included identifying critical team members, ensuring that they had redundancy, ramping up their monitoring of the network, and pretty much treating the situation as a disaster. And I heard this from both from both companies. They've also indicated that to the extent possible, they are requiring persons to work from home and ensuring that this is so. In terms of what it is that they'd be able to do in short order to increase connectivity or bandwidth, they are going to be looking at their networks to see what they could possibly do. In terms of the interface with the customers, they're going to put on additional persons to be answering calls. They also agreed that for the numbers that the Ministry of Health has published, persons will be able to get access to those numbers even if they don't have credit on their phone. And I want to take this opportunity to remind you as well that all the government websites are zero-rated, meaning you can get access to them even if you don't have a data plan. In terms of JPS, had a teleconference with them and the team. They've also activated their emergency planning. I'm pleased to report that the important issue of having capacity, they have indicated to me that they have the biggest margin of capacity they've ever had in the system, meaning they have some 300 megawatts above the peak demand, and if necessary, there's an additional 60 megawatts on standby if needed. They've activated their business continuity. They're ensuring that their system control center is adequately manned. They're looking at just different ways of ensuring that they stay on top of things. For example, they said for the system control center, which is the heart of their grid management, that they'll be working from 3 locations, of which 2 are backup locations, that they have some 90 days of food supply. They're in touch with all the independent power providers to operate from an emergency basis as well. They've put in place, from a financial perspective, they've put in place their emergency cash planning and cash strategy. So that means they are already in touch with their bankers to ensure that there's smooth sailing that way. And let me just add as well, Petrojam. We've spoken with Petrojam as well. Edjahz has indicated that for all their products, there is adequate supply. And as of yesterday, when I spoke with them, there were no issues that they saw on the horizon in terms of supplies. We have an agreement that of all the entities that I've spoken about, that we will be in touch daily, if there's any update from their side as well as from the government side. So this is the update I have as of today, and if needs be, if there are changes, we'll communicate that to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Another difficult one, water. Firstly, let me start by acknowledging that water is life, and certainly with the COVID threat, it is even more so. The challenge we've had is that our infrastructure, our water infrastructure.
Anyways, that was it for the show. Big up all of my subscribers and all of the viewers that will stay until the end of the show. We really appreciate it. Bless up on yourself and go and live good.